fall of 1985, in a small, quiet town in North Carolina, there was a young man named Edward Matthews. He received an unexpected gift from his long-lost grandmother. The gift was an antique wooden doll named Beans. The doll looked so lifelike. With a face so detailed, it seemed to hold a dark secret from a much darker past. Edward, though honored by the gift, never imagined that the doll's existence would bring disaster that would change his life forever. When he first laid eyes on Bobby, a strange feeling came over his chest, a feeling that something was wrong, even though he tried to push it away. The first night after the doll was placed on his bedside table, Edward was awakened by the sound of heavy footsteps, steps that came and went quickly, but when he opened his eyes and turned on the light, there was no one there, only an increasingly oppressive silence. In the next few days, the door to his room often opened by itself, even though there was no wind, and the wooden doll always moved without anyone touching it. Fear begins to creep into him, and though he tries to ignore the feeling, there is one reality that becomes increasingly undeniable. The Bobby doll carries something evil with it, and Edward is determined to dig deeper into what is truly trapped inside the doll, even if it means facing a threat greater than he could have ever imagined. Edward, increasingly trapped in an unseen terror, feels that he can no longer ignore the darkness lurking around Bobby. He decides to find out more about the doll, and with determination, he visits the antique shop where his grandmother bought Bobby, hoping to find a clue that could explain the strange phenomena that continue to occur. There, he meets the shop's elderly owner, a man who seems more frightened than intrigued by Edward's story. He reveals that Bobby has a very dark history. The doll previously belonged to a boy named Adam, who died tragically in an accident almost 100 years ago, and since then, Bobby has been a vehicle for the boy's spirit that could not leave. The deeper Edward digs into the doll's history, the more he feels like there is something connecting him to a dark past. And the next night, the most terrifying thing happens. In the dark living room, he sees the shadowy figure of a small child, standing in the corner of the room with blank eyes and a pale face, just watching him without moving. Days passed with fear gripping his heart, but even so, Edward couldn't stop, feeling like he had to reveal the truth about Bobby before it was too late. Little did Edward know that this decision would lead him into an increasingly terrifying conflict, one greater than anything he could have imagined, and one that would test the limits of his courage. Continue to the next part to find out how this terror develops. As Edward returns home with an increasingly heavy burden on his mind, Edward feels increasingly trapped in a world he doesn't understand, where Bobby's presence is not just a doll, but something more sinister. Every night, the sound of slow but steady footsteps returned throughout the house, as if the doll was watching Edward's every move, and sometimes he heard soft whispers, like someone calling his name from within the darkness. One particularly terrifying night, as Edward lay in bed, he saw the Bobby doll that had been lying still on the bedside table suddenly move, tilting its head as if looking at him with an unnatural smile, making his blood run cold. Strange things happened every night, and they all seemed more real and terrifying. Until one night, when he woke up from a cold chill, Edward saw the shadow of a small child floating in the air, his face smiling with a blank stare, and followed by a terrible scream, like the terrified scream of a trapped soul. As time went on, the vision became clearer, and the shadow seemed to come closer, as if something very evil wanted to take control of him. Unable to postpone the decision any longer, Edward decides to seek help from a psychic named Amanda, who might be able to help her overcome this terror, but she doesn't know that what they will face is far more terrifying than she imagined. What will happen when Amanda comes face to face with Bobby? Continue to the next part to find out their fate. After hearing Edward's story, Amanda, a psychic known for her uncanny ability to work with cursed objects, agrees to help despite her apparent hesitation. Upon arriving at Edward's house, Amanda immediately senses a different atmosphere, one that is trapped by evil energy and a terrifying presence. Amanda brings a number of powerful spiritual tools, salt, black candles, and protective amulets, to exorcise the evil spirits from the house. But when she enters the room where the doll is kept, her face turns deathly pale. In a trembling voice, Amanda warns Edward that Bobby is not just a haunted doll, but a cursed object that contains an evil power from another world. The spirit of a child named Adam, who has been unable to leave and now controls each of the doll's owners. In the midst of preparing the ritual to exorcise the spirit, the room suddenly became dark, and the door to the room slammed shut, as if an invisible force had locked them inside. In the darkness, they heard heavy footsteps and soft whispers. Then in front of them appeared the figure of a small child, Adam, with empty eyes and a face filled with hatred. Amanda tries to say the words of expulsion, but as time goes by, Bobby gets stronger, and Amanda feels that she is fighting something much bigger than she thought. What will happen next? Will they succeed in defeating Bobby's power, or will they become more entangled in his grip? Continue to the next part to see how this final battle ends. Darkness envelops the room as Amanda and Edward come face to face with Adam's spirit trapped in the Bobby doll. The terror they feel becomes more real as screams echo from the corner of the room, making their hearts beat faster. With trembling hands, Amanda continued her banishment spell, trying to control the evil energy that had filled every corner of the room. But Bobby, the doll that had been considered an inanimate object, suddenly jumped off the table, heading straight for them, as if it had a life of its own. In an instant, the wooden doll transformed itself into a more hideous figure, Adam's face now showing a hateful expression, his empty eyes staring at them with rage. Edward, who felt almost hopeless, found a large hammer hidden in the warehouse, and, with one deep decision, he smashed the doll with all his might, hoping to end this suffering once and for all. The Bobby doll exploded with a loud bang, accompanied by a scream that shook the walls, and all the lights went out instantly, leaving them in an eerie silence. However, even though Bobby was destroyed, from within the darkness, a small voice could be heard very clearly, uttering very terrifying words. "I will return." Edward and Amanda looked at each other, realizing that even though they had destroyed the doll, a greater threat might still remain, and this story was not over.